Hi, I'm Hope Forstenzer. I am the director of the Sidney and Gertrude Zack Gallery at the JCC of Greater Vancouver. And today I am chatting with Laurie Wohl, whose work is currently hanging on the walls of the gallery. Hi, Laurie. Thank you so much for being willing to chat with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Hope.
I'm really sorry that we have to do this by Zoom, but it'll be on our YouTube channel, so that'll be kind of fun.
That'll be great.
It will be. So can you just do me a favor and just start off by telling me a little bit about you, about your history as an artist, how you got into doing the kind of work that you do?
Right. I studied a whole bunch of things, but not art ever since 8th grade. And
So common.
That's
so common.
my uneducated background in art. But I have been an artist since 1976, I think. And I started unweaving in 1989. And do you want me to talk about the process now?
I was about to say that's a great segue into explaining what unweaving is. So that would be terrific.
Okay. Well, I got very frustrated with coming to the edge of a stretched canvas. And also the canvas being just sort of a flat surface for paint and texture.
And so prior to that, you'd been a painter?
I'd been painting on stretched canvas, right?
Got it.
And that was how I started out. And so one day I decided to just tack canvas to the wall rather than putting it on a stretcher. And that was a little bit better, but it still felt very static. So I took an X-Acto knife and made a small slit into the canvas and started pulling threads. And I pulled more and more, and I realized I could make this into different shapes. And as a friend of mine said at some point then, and you became completely unstrung. So
right. I mean, there are so many jokes hanging out right there.
Yeah. Right. So I have been unweaving. I've been unstrung since about 1989. And I work with text and form, the interplay of text and form, really, and try to show what's inside the canvas in a sense. It's as if when I'm working, I'm pulling out the colors, the whole inside of the canvas, even though the process is the reverse. I unweave and then I prime the surface of the canvas, and then I draw what I'm going to do, and then I paint. So painting is almost the last thing I do except for the beading. And I also use collage papers and various textures on some of the pieces as well. And my whole idea is to really integrate the form and the calligraphy and the meaning of the text. And so the piece behind you, for example,
the Exalt piece.
Is that
it's kind of heat? Yeah.
Well, I was looking at Hashki Reino is the other one.
Oh, sorry,
that one. And so that is my interpretation, really, of a talit, a prayer.
And it very much feels like one. I think we've had that piece has had the most response of all the pieces in here. First of all, we put it really right across from our door, so it's the first thing people see, but it's also definitely the brightest in terms of color treatment, right? So and I think because it kind of vibes like a talit, it draws people to it in a very particular way, and it does have that feel of itself being a sacred object. The rest, a lot of the pieces that you've made in here, from my perspective, seem like celebrations of sacred objects or celebration of sacred rituals or prayers. This seems like it's carrying that itself, that it has its own sacredness.
And that's really wonderful to hear. I mean, my idea is that you would feel like it was wrapped around you.
The response I've gotten to it has been, that's the one people want to touch. And we've had to put so many signs up. We have 6 or 7 signs up around the gallery that say, please resist the urge to embrace the pieces, no matter how much you love them.
I know, it's very tactile. And when I had a piece that was acquired by the Museum of Arts and Design some years ago, they put up a little railing around it in their new
Yeah,
acquisition thing, so people wouldn't touch. And the curator said every morning when he came in, he had to comb the piece again because
because
people had
someone
gone
touched it.
beyond the barrier.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that.
we've had that with the hanging piece, with the Kabbalat Shabbat piece.
Oh, I bet.
Um, because the one thing that's been really interesting is the number of small kids who run in and go inside of it. And we've been doing a lot of, I see why you would want to do that, but we're really trying to keep it where it's at and keep it happy. So maybe you can just step away. We have a really good series of volunteers who staff the gallery, and they do a great job at sort of chilling people out. But there's been a tremendous amount of fascination with the tactile quality of the pieces.
Right.
And you were saying that when you paint last. So I think that's really interesting when I look at the colors that you have on the basically the threads you pull out.
That's where I feel like I'm the magician, pulling the rabbit out of the hat kind of thing.
No, right?
Because the pieces actually look terrific, just sort of white on white. and,
I bet they do.
but I can't resist color. So
When you conceive of a piece, does it show up in your brain finished and then you sort of walk through the steps in your head or write them down or
I,
because it's so precise and has so many steps to it. It made me sort of wonder about that.
in my early days, I did do that. And, but then as I got more confident with what I was doing, I just generally figure out what shape is going to evoke the text that I'm working with, because I work now primarily with texts from both Judaism and Christianity and Islam.
Oh wow.
And so the texts are what sort of, that has to speak to me in terms of what it makes me think of visually. Eitz Hayim was easy. That's a
Oh
true
sure.
form. It's a form
Sure.
I've used before. Exalt, which is to the right of
Yeah.
Ashkenazu.
Yeah.
That's also another interpretation of a priestly vestment, a garment, that comes when the
Sure.
tablet.
When the
Right,
rabbis wear. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. So I'm working with these various things, and it was very challenging both for the Shabbat project and the meditation project to think of enough different forms to interpret the text, because you don't want to be too repetitive, but sometimes it's
Yeah.
necessary.
Well, I mean, there is while I would sort of as I scan sort of down the wall of the bulk of the Shabbat project, while I wouldn't disagree that there's some a certain amount of repetition, the pieces have very distinct voices, and they feel like a progression and not like I'm doing this again, I'm doing this prayer thing again. And they have a world happening in them individually, especially when you get right down to the real details, the beads and the birds and the dancing angels. And I think that really gives each one of them a tremendous amount of depth and life. What made you, like, when you say that you use texts from from different religions, including Judaism, obviously, what was it that made you want to go with religious texts as the base for your pieces?
I started that a really long time ago. It was during the days of confessional art, I would call it, where everybody was scrawling their diary on their page.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
that was an oldie but a goodie. Yeah.
so I thought, well, I don't want to do that, but I'm not sure I want a text that everybody can read. So I think I'll use Hebrew, and then, I'll see what happens. And of course, the first time I exhibited a piece with Hebrew on it, it was in a context where lots of people could read Hebrew. And
Right.
so that was, but then because the first pieces I did with unweavings, I didn't have text on it. I just had my iconography, my little figures on it. But I've really been drawn to working with text, the poetry of it. It has a lot of meaning to me, both
Oh
from my
yeah.
own religion, and I've read a lot of in Eastern religions, and that's just sort of where I'm comfortable, really. Islam came in after September 11th. Really, I live in New York City, although that's not
Right.
where I am now. But I live in New
No.
York City, and we had just moved there, and this was a very intense.
Yeah, that what a time to move there. Did you
And
grow up there?
no, I grew up in part in DC and part in San Diego.
Oh, two very different places.
Right, right, very different. But I had been working on church projects from about 2001 to 2010, both for Fourth Presbyterian Church in Chicago, which had commissioned 12 pieces for their sanctuary for
Oh,
ordinary
wow.
time. And they wanted me to use the Old Testament text primarily, and wanted me to use Hebrew as well as English calligraphy.
Oh,
So
that's lovely.
that was a really wonderful project, and that got me into the interfaith world more concretely. And then somebody who was consulting with Madison Avenue Presbyterian Church saw the Chicago project and went to Madison Avenue and said, you really have to commission something. So they commissioned 4 pieces for the different liturgical seasons that hang from the pulpit. And that had text both in Hebrew, English, and Greek. And there were some
Wow.
other church projects. It was really wonderful. But from the time that September 11th happened, I was thinking sort of subconsciously about sort of, what's my role in all this? Is there anything an artist can do to make a conversation better among Judaism and Christianity and Islam, and especially when so many Muslims were demonized? I felt heartsick at that. It was really, we as Jews understand what that means. And so that was just sort of all percolating. And in 2009, I started an intense reading of both spiritual texts and poetry from the period of the Convivencia in Spain, the medieval period,
Oh,
when the
wow.
two religions coexisted more or less peacefully, not completely, but more or less, and started reading contemporary Middle Eastern poetry. And I found themes that were congruent really between the two periods, especially the themes of memory and exile and relationship to God, and a yearning for reconciliation, talking about enemies. Just there were so many things that needed to be talked about together. So that's when I started this 18-piece project, Birds of Longing, Exile
Right.
and Memory. And that was occupied me for a lot of years.
Yeah, it's good. It's a lot of complex work.
Well, and also there was so much poetry that was so wonderful. My favorite poets were Yehuda Amichai and Mahmoud Darwish from the contemporary period, and wonderful poetry. So I felt very lucky to have that. And I did a soundscape with that, with readers, native speakers of Arabic and Hebrew, reading the selections that were
Oh,
embedded
wow.
in the pieces to a composed soundtrack by my composer. So that was a really intense project, and indirectly led to the Shabbat project.
Yeah, how did the Shabbat project come about? Like, what was the kickoff for that? What started
Yeah,
that up for you?
I really, after the 18 pieces, and it was hard to stop after 18 pieces, there was a lot more poetry,
I'm
but
sure. Yeah.
like enough. So, but I was getting pretty low because it was, things in the Middle East were very unstable, and there seemed like there wasn't a lot of hope for any peace process. And it was at a time when the United States was experiencing a lot of xenophobia because of immigrants and refugees at our own borders. I was heartsick with all that and exhausted. And I thought, well, how do I renew myself? So I turned to the Kabbalat Shabbat service, which is so wonderful in it's reflective, it's joyous, it separates you from the work week like it's supposed to do.
Yeah, it's a weekly renewal.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and music has always been an intense part of my life. I play keyboard. I won't say anything about trying to learn the lute. That was not a success. But
Now I, of course, would love to hear it, but okay, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, you wouldn't. But I play piano and harpsichord. But music is really how I get into services, really Shabbat services or high holiday services. That is what brings the prayers alive to me. And it was so wonderful. And I thought I should do basically a visual midrash of the Kabbalat Shabbat pieces that
Yeah,
the prayers and music that mean so much to me. So I started the Shabbat Project, and my congregation in New York is Stephen Weiss Free Synagogue,
it's a
and
great, great place.
it is a wonderful place, and the cantor dance singer is particularly wonderful. And it was his music, a lot of his own music, a lot of other music, a lot of ancient nigunim, words without songs without words. And he helped me. To put together a soundscape for the Shabbat Project, which I hope people will listen to as they go
I
around.
know. I've been demonstrating it for people who come in. It works really well, and if you have headphones, or even if you don't, as long as you have a phone, smartphone, you can scan the QR codes that are up next to each piece, and you can hear the sound that goes with it, the song that goes with it, and the conversation between the sound, the music, and the piece is really quite something.
Which is what I wanted to do, to say this, there's an interaction here between the prayers and the visual aspect and the music. And this is what, led me to create this. And it was very special for me doing this project, and very renewing. So
Yeah, I would bet. And also the Kabbalah Shabbat and all of the forms that it's taken over thousands of years, music has been central to it in different forms from the beginning.
right.
Whether it's sort of again the more traditional melodies, or I grew up in a shul that people played guitar and sang
Right.
reinventions of those same prayers and different melodies, and those were very central to my experience of Shabbat and of being Jewish as well. So I think that that's very, very consistent as a theme through the Jewish experience with prayer and with
Well, it's very
um,
interesting. I'm probably a generation or two older than you are. And this was at a
I'll be so
time
sure.
I grew up, Reform Judaism was very reform. There was hardly any Hebrew in the prayer book.
Oh,
We,
interesting.
we belonged to a synagogue where the organ was played. And my mother, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather was an Orthodox rabbi. My mother, the first time we went to the Reform synagogue, nearly died because of the organ music. She thought she was in church.
Right, I
So,
know that's not right.
so I, so in terms of what I got in terms of music was more a family background in the
Sure.
beginning rather than the Reform background. And what's been wonderful when we joined Stephen Weiss, we had belonged to other Reform synagogues in our various places we lived, but my husband and I, but Stephen Weiss was wonderful because basically the whole Kabbalah Shabbat service is pretty much in Hebrew.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful and a revelation to me, really. And we had never really experienced, a wonderful Kabbalah Shabbat service. And so this has been really quite central to our experience of being there.
Yeah, when I was a kid in a Reform synagogue, we did in fact have an organist, but we also had a young cantor who was very keen on the melodies that had been written by a rabbi and cantor pair, who had created a way of doing the Kabbalah Shabbat with much more modern folk song sort of level melodies. One of the great things about listening to the music coming through here is, well, it contains a tremendous aspect of familiarity, but it's also very specific, and it manages to do both, which is what the best sort of compositions around those prayers can do.
It's been wonderful when I've had other exhibits and when I've given talks at them and play some of the excerpts, when I'm giving the talk, and the people start clapping their hands and, and singing along. And
Yeah,
there's so much that's common,
right.
In it. So that's been wonderful.
And there's a real warmth to it.
The communal aspect of prayer is so important.
Yeah.
really, not just the individual aspect of it.
And that's
that's
true of religion in general, right? Like what religion gave people for so long, and that is missing from so many people in modern life, is a feeling of community, of being connected to something that's not, that's, you know, that's bigger than you. And people who are not very religious find it in different places, and people who are religious can still go back to temples and shuls and mosques and you know, really, and churches, and find themselves connected in that
right.
way. And it's a really powerful thing. It's a powerful thing, you know. Just, I remember the distinct feeling being a kid and celebrating Yom Kippur, and the realization that Jews all over the world were doing it at the same moment that I was doing it. It made me feel part of something quite substantial.
I'll never forget, we were in Berkeley for a year, and we went to a Hillel service, and a number of the students had these beautiful large prayer shawls that they really wrapped themselves in. It wasn't like a little talit, you know,
Yeah.
they were desert, you know, sort of a sand color, and very beautiful. And I thought, wow, this is just like what they were doing in the desert. You know, it just felt, and it felt such a sense of connection with that. It was just a little thing, but it was really beautiful.
Yeah. And I want to talk a little bit about the meditation project before we sort of run out of time. Is So I know that this, how the Shabbat project came about. It the meditation project, which I'm going to just pan around a little bit. Forgive my bubbly. Um, is hanging on sort of the second half of the show, in the across the back here in the gallery. You talked about that coming together because of COVID. So can you talk to that a little bit?
Right. Well, this actually ties in with what we were talking about with that community.
Yeah.
As we were in New York, at our place in New York, at the beginning of COVID, at the extreme lockdown of March 2020. And that was such an intense experience. And so many people were dying, and we all had to be isolated. It was just, you know, you weren't going anywhere really. You ordered your groceries if you could, or you scooted to the store and scooted right back, you know, that kind of thing. But nobody was going anywhere. And it came about, a very dear friend of ours died right then, and Rabbi Angela Buckdahl from Central Synagogue
Hmm.
did the service, and I was very impressed with how she did it.
She's amazing.
Yes, she's
I've seen
incredible.
video of her. She's really amazing.
And so I looked her up, and it said that she had just started this Zoom meditation. So, like, you know, 2 days before. And so I tuned in, and she was doing it 5 days a week. She did that for months, for absolute months. And I've never meditated formally. I always think my art practice is my meditation. You know, I'm working thread by thread. It's, you know, it's very like
It
that.
has a very meditative quality. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but I never thought I could sit still for meditation. I thought I would always be too restless. But she was so engaging. She always begins with Modani Lefanecha, let us thank God for the gift of this day. And then she will give a teaching, and then we will have 20 minutes of meditation. And then she trained as a cantor as well as a rabbi. And then she will
Right.
sing something at the end. And after a number of these sessions, I thought, I can translate this visually. And so that is how the meditation project came about, a combination of responses to her teachings, and when I was meditating on my own, other things that came into my mind. But again, it's very centered on biblical texts
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
the most part, not completely. Like kesher, which is the word for circle, connection, relationship. She read us a poem by Rilke about circles of connection. So it was a combination of that. And it was a wonderful sense of community. We had and still have something like 300 to 500 people who tune in for, now it's a weekly meditation session.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. And it's just very special to have that connection. there, and it helped so much in the isolation, the extreme isolation period of the pandemic. That was just,
Yeah.
we were all responding to it. She was responding to it also, and very open about what she was feeling, and that helped. And I think I wasn't alone. I think we were all at different stages crying a lot,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it
You definitely were not alone.
was, it was very helpful. And
Yeah.
I wanted to interpret that. So that was how the meditation project came about. So
Yeah. And it's really quite stunning to look at, um and to have the contrast between the color palettes that you use for the Shabbat project and the meditation project. The Shabbat project has all of that. It reminds me of put me in mind of Dodie Lee, like the whole
uh,
idea of a bride, right? Like these very beautiful sort of exuberant life colors. And the meditation project is more subdued. Its color palette is more is not dark so much as thoughtful, and more and definitely less celebratory, but just as intense. And I found that you can see this in some ways. Hearing you tell the story of how it came out, you can sort of feel the struggle of trying to find center at a time where the center isn't holding,
right.
and how complicated that is, and how connection, which is so vital to human beings feeling well, uh, was something that Rabbi Bookdahl was able to give everyone in
Right.
those
And they
sessions.
were too. Every evening at 7 o'clock, people who had balconies would get
I
out of
know,
their
yeah,
balconies and bang their pots and pans
we
as
did
a
that
thank
here
you
too.
to the health workers,
Yeah, we did that
and
here too. Yeah,
so you would hear them. You say, "Okay, everybody's there. We hear you." That was very communal
yeah.
also.
My son was 4 when the lockdown happened, and um, he still occasionally looks at the clock and was like, "It's 7 o'clock. Are we going out on the balcony?" And it's like,
Right.
"Oh, we could if you wanted to, honey." And he really took that very seriously, and it was really,
But, yeah, for a young child, that is a very
well, yeah,
intense
he liked to bang a pot and pan. Who doesn't?
spot.
But also, my partner is a healthcare worker, so he was really into that kind of the importance of that era. So what are you going to do next? Like, what are you working on now?
My long-term project is about refugees and immigrants.
Awesome, love that.
So, yeah, and I don't know what form it will take, and I have a lot of reading to do and thinking to do, and we'll see what happens. And I would like to have a soundscape with that one as well.
Yeah.
So see what happens with that.
About how long does it usually take? I know that the meditation project, because of the isolation and the lockdowns, it was much more, you were concentrated on it in a very intense way. But how long does a project from start to finish take? And does the cat help?
The cat does not help. She's very greedy for time, and if she's not getting enough, she grabs my leg.
Yeah.
So it depends. The Birds of Longing, of course, was 18 pieces, and that
Right.
was 6 years, seven, because large pieces, for example, take 2.5 to 3 months each. So that's the meditation pieces are somewhat smaller, so they don't take quite as long. So it was faster, and I have no idea what will happen with refugees and immigrants. It just has to percolate, and I have to give it time. But I'm impatient because I like working with my hands, so I have to, see what will happen there. And I'm trying to put together both things that are happening in the Middle East and things that are happening on our own borders. So I have to figure out how to do that. But in the context of welcoming the stranger, this is what we're all about, basically, and how
Yeah.
so that's the idea. And
I would love to see you do something on a Passover Seder when you open the door and tell whoever's hungry to come in and eat.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's it.
church in Atlanta commissioned a piece to put at the entrance of their shelter,
Oh, wow.
which had texts from Isaiah and from the New Testament, which borrowed from Isaiah about welcoming the stranger.
Yeah.
And
Awesome.
it was
I
really
love that.
beautiful, really beautiful. So that is, in a sense, the beginning, except that I have a lot more to do. So,
Well, Laurie, I can't thank you enough for being willing to talk to me on the technological universe of Zoom. I feel really grateful to have your work here in the gallery, and really glad that we got a chance to talk. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
yeah, this, even though it's virtual, it feels really terrific to meet you and talk with you. And thank you for your own responses to my work. You are the ideal viewer.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. All right. So I think we'll let you go into the rest of your day and say Shabbat Shalom. And we'll be in touch, of course, because your show is going to be up for a bit yet. Laurie's show is going to be up in the gallery until November 7th. We're going to have hopefully another event or two around it, but come and see Journeys, the Shabbat and Meditation Projects here at the Sidney and Gertrude Zack Gallery.